Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would certainly like to echo the comments that we just heard from Dr. Grunwald about the attempt to integrate sciences and humanities together in really a comprehensive project opening towards a theological transcendence. All of my work in one way or another revolves around this ambition. What I would like to bring to the table is a specifically negative theological or apophatic approach. I think that this is really a key to being able to achieve the kind of comprehensive integration that you just envisaged for us. We shouldn't hear, I don't think, negative theology as being negative. As I say, it is really a key to opening towards all of the kinds of expressions in the arts, music, and everything else, the expression of the transcendent, once we have achieved a critical understanding perspective of all of our own articulations of the transcendent, and even that expression itself needs to be critiqued, discarded at a certain point in favor of the various expressions that all of the arts can offer up to us. And I'm going to focus particularly on the art of literature and try to sketch very summarily some kind of a new emergence of literary art as a form of prophecy opening a transcendent realm. I think this is a project really of modern poets and the revelatory poetic art that we find very clearly and explicitly in Dante. It becomes more and more self-conscious based on human inventiveness and individual talents as modernity progresses. But I want to see this not as a loss of the original prophetic inspiration, explicitly theological as we find it in Dante in the Divine Comedy. It is actually opening this space, this infinite space of subjective self-consciousness, which is already there and crucial in Dante. It comes to full self-consciousness in some ways after the age of German idealism, in the wake of Kant's philosophy of consciousness, Hegel's absolute self-consciousness. It comes fully to self-consciousness then poetically with Mallarmé, and very much in the wake of that cultural revolution. He gets it from Wagner and music in particular, really, the revolution of the German idealists. So I'm going to try and explore the capacity here of literature to mediate an event of the divine word through a kind of subjective auto-reflexivity. This is crucial to poetic language itself. It's always based on structures of self-reflection. And in Dante now, this begins to become constitutive of theological revelation. Of course, on the way now from Dante to Mallarmé, well, there's any number of precedents to be mentioned. And actually, Hamlet is very much a key to Mallarmé's reading of the poetic tradition. Hamlet, of course, introduces this element of doubt, to be or not to be. Mallarmé writes, picks up explicitly on that. Hamlet is constantly present to Mallarmé in producing a poetics of doubt, of suggestion, but it is also very much a question of doubting, not propositions, but the doubt creates a fertile space for poetic imagination, and Mallarmé's poetry very much inhabits that. Hamlet provides, I think, for him, the crisis in the modern world of a direct relation to transcendence, because the transcendent order comes back to him in the form of a ghost of the father, and he can no longer completely believe. He has to subject it to tests, right? And his friend Horatio, they've been studying in Wittenberg, learning new scientific techniques. Now there's no longer this direct revelation of the word of the Father. Hamlet hears it, he even believes it. Oh, my prophetic soul. He's still in touch with that order. And yet now as a modern man, he's not able to act directly in response to the prophetic revealed word of the Father. He has to test it, find oracular, it's visual, the visual proof, the mousetrap is all a way of producing empirical evidence rather than direct belief. And this already traces out a certain tragedy of modern culture that, of course, Mallarmé assumes in the sense of taking it on himself entirely. And yet he's able to give it a turn whereby it becomes a way of opening through poetic language to this realm of transcendence, of revelation and revolution as well. The poetic language, it's exposed very much in Mallarmé, and especially through the readings of contemporary political philosophers. There's a whole slew of them who are intensely interested in Mallarmé. Alain Badiou, Quentin Meillassoux, it's a later generation, Jean-Claude Milner. They're all a generation after Sartre, Kristeva. And Mallarmé continues to play this role of actually stimulating a thinking of revolution. There's a kind of revolution in poetic language that really becomes visible in Mallarmé. Now, it is absolutely there in Dante. Poetic language itself is it's a revelation, but it's also a revolution. Dante, of course, wanted to revolutionize his world politically. He wanted his poetry to intervene directly. He writes letters to the Emperor Henry VII and in campaigning in Italy. Dante's idea really was to have a direct influence, but that failed utterly. The way in which Dante does have an influence on history and provides a revolution in culture is through the nature of poetic language as opening a sphere, a dimension that is actually being completely closed out, by modernity and a kind of reductive self-reflexivity that always returns to the self, rather than a self-reflexivity that is fully critical and finds the limits and then opens beyond the limits of the self. The self dissolves in a certain sense. It opens up into its infinite relatedness to others. We see this happening in Mallarmé's language, the scintillation, that's one of his constant images, la scintillation of language in all possible directions of meaning infinitely. Of course, Dante's polysemousness is a good point of departure for this kind of a revolution, with all of the differences, of course, that are there between them. Prophecy in this movement within modern culture, it turns from positive prediction to relating oneself rather to the unknown. It's not about delivering propositions, statements about what's going to happen. For Mallarmé, of course, it's le hasard, the chance, his culminating poem, Un coup de dé, the toss of the dice. He opens to an infinite kind of chance, which I want to tie back to Dante's relationship to the transcendent as a God who remains ineffable to him. This is the constant insistence in the Paradiso from the very first verses all the way to the end and all throughout is on the absolute ineffability. That's what generates Dante's whole poem, the struggle with what he cannot say, with a relation to transcendence. And this transcendence, it is an absolute other. Of course, he experiences it first as in the form of a woman, Beatrice, but one who transcends all of his perceptions. This, incidentally, is taken up by Mallarmé La destruction était ma Béatrice is one of his famous statements in his letters. Destruction became his Beatrice, and it really, in the sense of beatifier, right? It has the sense very clearly for Dante, and it really echoes through to Mallarmé. He has an existential crisis. Nothing does become the main theme. This inanité sonore, a sonorous inanity, is at the very heart of all of his work. But I think we still want to see there the relation to Beatrice, a kind of beatitude that comes to Mallarmé through this experimentation with poetic language. Poetry really, in the sense of making, poiesis, as the original Greek says, it becomes specifically prophecy. And then prophecy is, as I say, it predicts, okay, that's part of it, but it's more than that, it really is performative. It gives things their form and contributes essentially to realizing what it envisages, right? This is the efficacity, one might say, of poetic language as it is discovered in these poets and many really. I reconstructed these traditions really all through, from Chaucer to Milton to Blake, and then on to nearer to Mallarmé, Hugo, Baudelaire, Rimbaud. Their poetry is visionary. It is opening this relation to another world, actually to this world as other in every respect, to be discovered in all of its infinite mystery. And I think that then what happens in Dante with his discovery of a modern poetic language, which is very much based on the subject for Dante. He emerges, right, as a subject, and he gives us a language of his own creation, and he really inhabits that subjectivity in unprecedented ways. I think we can see this very clearly, finally, from the perspective of Mallarmé, and then we can see the extent to which this revelation of a theological nature becomes also a revolution. It's a revolution, even a political revolution, but it's by not entering into the oppositions which are constitutive of politics, but rather by opening another space, an alternative where we don't have to be facing off and in mutual misunderstanding and impasse, just decrying one another's ideologies. There is another space where everything is tapped into in its emergence, right? The emergence of language, right? This is it's a negative theology of origins that I find articulated in Mallarmé, which goes back to the origin of poetic language as Dante gives it to us. And that gives the possibility for a reorigination of the world. Dante conceives of it this way in De Vulgare Eloquentia, his treatise on language, and providing really a whole history of language from the Primiloquium, Adam's first word. This is the basis for political society, the basis for any kind of human community, is this word in which we need to be infinitely open to one another. And that has to be a poetic word, because other words will face us off in opposition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.